Welcome. Thank you. I'm Shoto. I'm the Sukansu and the Shisui here at SokukoJi Buddhist Monastery, which means I help keep things going, trying to help with the programming and the property upkeep here. I just want to invite anyone who finds value in these teachings to please participate either by joining us for the Dharma talks from either Sokuzan or his monks, his students. Join us for any of the book studies throughout the week, even just one time throughout the week would be great to see you in our Zendo or to join us online. We could really use your help with your practice, joining us, and also financially to help us keep the programming going here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoka. So tonight, Sokuzan asked me a few hours ago to give the talk, and Ondo suggested the title, "What is a Student?" And she also mentioned she wanted to hear more about the Diamond Sutra, which I'll see if I can bring that in a little bit. Not sure. So what is a student? That's an interesting question. We're not asking who particularly, although we could. What is a student? And I think of it also as what is a true student. So that may be that may bring up a little dichotomy between what we generally think a student is and the distinction of a Buddhist student or a Dharma student. I'm currently working in a library at a community college, and I'm surrounded by students in the traditional sense, studying for some type of degree. So I'm looking at the difference between that and living at a monastery and the kind of students we have here. And there seem to be differences and similarities. So typically, a student is someone who can memorize things, remember facts and figures, pass a test, get approval from teachers and fellow students, obtain a degree, and ideally make some money. It's not looking that way quite as much as it used to. However, that's still a model that we work with every day. So what's the difference between that and the student we're talking about here, where I like the term true student because we also use the term true teacher. And perhaps that is pointing to the non-separation there, that we need separation to see. I think in Yudao's talk, she mentioned how, I don't remember how she said it, but it's in a lot of texts as well, that if the student is sincere, studying and practicing, the teacher will eventually appear. I don't know that that's a guarantee, however, it seems to show up that way. So the term true student for me actually comes from the previous Sangha that I was a part of, still am a part of, although I don't do a whole lot in that area. I don't feel like I've left either. But my experience there, I was thinking about this on the drive here, how frustrating it was to read a lot of Buddhist material, traditional Buddhist material. We also have the Shambhala teachings in that Sangha. And I like to read, and I'm inspired by those things, so I read a lot. And then it became apparent that if I wanted to attend certain meditation retreats. There were prerequisites for that, which meant taking weekend programs, things like that. And this was leading up to, I've experienced a lot of people teaching who I would call, I just was not impressed by their teaching. It just sounded like they were explaining what they read in the same book that I read. And perhaps that's what I'm doing as well. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that it's just countless weekend programs or week-longs or month-long programs where I did not have a connection to the teacher. I felt quite irritated by the person who was teaching, yet the teachings were extremely powerful nonetheless. And I don't think it was until I came to SokukoJi that the term true student kind of arose, that it doesn't really matter. On some level, eventually you have to be a true student. Even if you meet a true teacher, you're the one who's always with yourself. So whatever you receive from a true teacher or someone you think is not a true teacher, my sense is that you're still receiving Dharma teachings on some level. And I don't know if this relates, but I was remembering how when I came to SokukoJi, every single form here is different than the forms I did in the Shambhala Sangha. And so that can be kind of inspiring and liberating and also frustrating and irritating. But again, it comes back to, I wanted to be here and I wanted to learn these forms. I wanted to be with this particular teacher, this particular Sangha. And so that's what I did and am doing. Some other ideas about what is a student. In the Diamond Sutra, as Ondo was asking about, we have one of the Buddha's main students at the time, Subhuti, asking questions of the Buddha, and the Buddha also asking questions of Subhuti. And he's said to be somewhat realized, kind of Shravaka understanding, which means he has some understanding of emptiness, and technically he's supposedly not going to return to samsara with his realization. But throughout the sutra, the Buddha kind of pushes Subhuti beyond that, and us as well, if we read the sutra. And whenever I read that sutra and also the Lankavatara, and now I'm into the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is this gigantic book, flower ornament scripture. I don't really recommend it, but if you do jump into it, shoot me a text and we'll talk about it. I love it. It's extremely difficult in a way that I've never read another Buddhist text. But in there as well, after I think 7 or 8 chapters, you finally get to the actual teaching. Up to that point, it's just a lot of setting up of the world systems and who's at this meeting. But when you finally get to a point where there's what appears more like a traditional teaching, or a teaching we're used to, not that the other section isn't, it comes down to Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, asking the Buddha, who has different names in each chapter. And you could say it's different Buddhas, or you could say it's the same Buddha. It doesn't tell you either way to do it in the sutra. And it kind of leans toward both being true. But there we have Manjushri asking questions of the teacher. And here we have the Bodhisattva of wisdom, who is the wisdom of all the Buddhas. So why is he asking questions? Wouldn't he already know all of this? Yet his questions are excellent. They're extremely thorough and direct, and they go right to the heart of the matter. I'm only a couple chapters into Manjushri asking questions of, I think, 2 or 3 different Buddhas. And there's billions and trillions of bodhisattvas and Buddhas at this meeting, and all these. It's overwhelming how many world systems are included in this sutra. So that's just me nerding out a little bit. But my point is that those sutras, then you also have the Lankavatara, where Mahamati is asking questions of the Buddha. In the Tibetan tradition, probably the best, truest student that I can think of is Yeshe Sogyal, who was extremely good at asking questions of Padmasambhava and remembering them, remembering the answers. And she was also said to be equal in realization to Padmasambhava. And if you read through those texts, you'll also hear Padmasambhava asking questions of Yeshe Sogyal, although that's not emphasized quite as much. And perhaps that's because it's a patriarchal society again, or we just haven't gotten around to translating that yet. But in a lot of these ancient teachings, we have someone who's already extremely wise, if not equal to the teacher, asking questions. And it seems to be for the benefit of everyone present. But I find that inspiring, and it inspires me to be at a Dharma talk by any of the monks here or our teacher Sokuzan, and reflect on what I want to know, what I might need to know to see what this is. And I have a tendency to be a know-it-all, so that can be challenging. So sometimes I just offer that, and I ask a question that kind of, I feel it kind of reveals that I think I already know the answer. But there's a little bit of trying to offer that anyway and see where it goes. A couple more things, and then I'll receive questions if there are any. It has to do with a student-teacher relationship within Buddhism, and kind of asking ourselves, does that mean you need to accept or agree or obey? Can you disagree? Can you disobey? And in the middle there's the word that Sokuzan uses, consider. Just consider it. And I wonder if that's a space of agreeing and disagreeing, but just kind of holding that whole miasma in your mind stream. Because the word devotion will come up as well. And surrender often follows the word devotion, but that can be tricky as well. Those words they seem to be kind of loaded, but it's a good area to go in if there are questions in that area. And then there's the whole area of being a student and having idealized the teacher, being disappointed and how you work with that. Are you able to bring that directly to the teacher, or are you kind of side gossiping a little bit, which can happen and can still be noticed, and then you can still bring that to the teacher? I think that's good enough for now. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to engage. Milka.
Milka bowing, what does a Buddhist student need to do? Bowing.
Nothing real fancy comes up. I Sitting is the main thing. I know Buddhists who don't sit a lot and they know some of the teachings. That seems to be the most important, even to the point of you might lose your connection with your teacher for whatever reason. So a sitting practice, I think, is from what I can tell, is the most important thing. And connected with that, studying Buddhist Dharma. And if you're lucky, having a teacher that you're connected with to refine all of that, your sitting, your study, how you're seeing your world and your own mind.
Milka bowing, do we need to bring what we're reading or studying to sitting? Bowing.
No, you don't need to. It's more of, you've probably had this experience perhaps where it could just show up on the cushion and it's another thing to observe. However it arises, however long it lingers, just watch that process. Watch if it's entertainment. You might not have words like that, like entertainment, but just noticing the quality of how it's affecting or not affecting the situation of just sitting.
Milka bowing, what Buddhist text would you recommend, if any, to a student on this path? Bowing.
It would depend. It would depend on the student. Like I was saying, the Avatamsaka Sutra. Right now, I can't think of anyone I would recommend that to. I know Udao has dipped into it a bit. A few other people. I love it personally, but so if someone got into it, I would have fun discussing that with them. Like Udao and I did a little bit on our car ride recently. I don't really have a go-to for anyone though. It would depend.
Thank you.
Shoto.
Shoto bowing. I think I would agree with your one response that like meditation seems to be the core. Just looking at like not always so or something like that. Like, are there other valid paths that maybe don't emphasize that or have that in it so much that we could still realize? Like I'm thinking service or something like that. Knowing.
That's a good question. I don't know where these questions come from for you. What popped up was like Pure Land Buddhism and some kind of very devotional thing. And another one is Nisargadatta Maharaj, who is kind of a non-dual Advaita type teacher. I don't know if he was officially affiliated with that. However, my understanding is he had a guru, a teacher, and his teacher said, do this. And then he did that for 3 years and realized. So there wasn't he wasn't, as far as I could tell, he wasn't doing Shikantaza, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Shamatha Vipassana, any of those, Tonglen, but just focusing on a sense of, I I think he was supposed to return to I am. But I know I've had situations myself where I was living in I would call it somewhat of a hellish situation where my practice was one of the main triggers of uh, emotional violence, let's say. So I would hide it. Sometimes I wasn't able to sit based just on my perceptions. Sokuzan actually helped me with that a bit. And in that situation, I was able to kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than I had had a lot of practice with mantras and visualization and connection with those practices. And I figured if I could sit with my partner at the time and we were maybe watching a show of some kind and I was doing mantras on the side as like planting a seed of somehow I'm going to get back to my sitting meditation. So it's like my intention was I wanted to return to my practice and my study and my path, but the obstacles were so thick at that time that and I was able to do these mantras for whatever reason. I was questioned a little bit, but it didn't invoke the violence I was used to. So I don't know that anyone else would ever have to do that. That seems pretty particular to my path, but um, it meant a lot to me that I found some way to connect to the teachings in that very painful situation.
Joe Bowing, I think part of where the question, since you brought that up, it was coming up is I was kind of shocked recently-ish, where I recall Sogazan said something like, if we're in the middle of a situation and we've practiced a lot and there's difficulty, and our first response is, I need to go sit, like there was something suspicious or even like off about that, my words. So I'm just curious about how that looks to you, or how maybe practice can be a cover up. Maybe that's the question. If in fact it can, bowing.
Yeah, that's a good one. I feel like I have experience with that as well. Just it's like an escape. It can be an escape, especially for introverts. Being an extreme introvert myself, I just want to go somewhere and be alone. So even sitting in the Zendo is sometimes an escape from socializing and stuff like that. So I see that in myself often. I don't know that there's a lot to do with it other than observe it. That's kind of what we're doing here. And I don't know that there's always a way that I can escape by going to sit. Although I think it's probably happened. Any more in that area?
Mhm. Not yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Shoto. Yudo.
You're not buying. You said eventually you have to be a true student. So if you start out as not a true student, you're just like, I'll go check this out. And what might happen to that you might? I'm not sure this is a really clear or good question, but that you might become a true student.
Yeah, even that label true student feels a little condescending in a way. I'm trying to point at something with that. It's probably choiceless, so it's not like you can do anything. So if there's some kind of inspiration connected with these teachings or a particular teacher or sangha, that can lead you in further You start out just checking it out, which I would say is pre-true student. But something, I don't know what the word is there. Inspiring doesn't really work, but something like that draws you in further and further. And then I think you find out what kind of student you are in that particular situation based on when difficulty arises. So I think it has to do with that. Your idealizations and your disappointment, and how does that work on your path? Do you just turn and run as soon as something becomes disappointing or the teacher does something you disapprove of? Or, you can pick and choose the Dharma books. There's so many. I like this one. I don't like that one. That's a beautiful thing of the book studies here is if we pick a book to study here that you despise, you get to enjoy it anyway. Maybe that's a weird way to say it, but that's my experience. It's like, well, I'm here for the next hour of this book I hate, and we've all had books we like or dislike. But what a gift in a way. I mean, would you actually go to a bookstore and look through the Dharma books or other books and then pick one that you don't like, that you're not interested in? So it's powerful to sit here and study a book you don't like with perhaps people you don't like on a day where you feel like crap or something horrible has happened and you're in a lot of pain. So maybe that's another aspect of true student is after a while on this path, you don't know what else to come back to is one way to say it, or you do know what to come back to. The vow, that's one way to say it. The forms, just showing up to the forms, even though, Milk and I were at our jobs today and we come here tired and I just want to go to bed. But this is important to me.
I did go to bed for 20 minutes.
Did you? So you got a nap. No fair. I'm very happy you got a nap. So yeah, okay. Any more in that area?
You know, if we're studying a book we don't like, does it ever become a book that you do like, or do you see value in that?
I see value. Yeah, I could still have, and it could change some of my initial perceptions about what I don't like about it. It could also enforce what I don't like about it. But the whole process is you're getting deeper into it. So you're going to see more what's valuable and what's not for that book for you. And, the whole thing can change. I'm sure you've read a lot of books. I'm sure you've had some of that.
You don't mind. There aren't very many that I don't like, but there are a few. They're usually just kind of bad books. Written by bad students, not true ones. No, that's not good at all.
No claims.
Just kidding. Thank you.
Shoto.
Shoto bowing. I like you brought up an area that looks like attention to me. There's the teaching of do it anyway, and my experience of living here. There's also like take care of yourself, because we all live here. Not to babble. So, can you say anything about that, like perceived tension, or how to work with those two teachings together, bowing?
Yeah, that is a very challenging area, whether you're at this monastery or, being a householder yogi, so to speak, or a stay-at-home dad who's trying to stay sane. You probably have to do both. I've pushed myself way beyond my limits and made myself sick for weeks by just pushing too hard and being too macho. Sokuzan has some stories around that as well. And you might have to go the other way too and baby yourself a little bit and see how that looks. That's a beautiful thing about this monastery, is that it is emphasized to be aware of that. I don't know anywhere else on earth currently where there's very strong forms, and yet we're encouraged to take care of ourselves and do it anyway at the same time. Is there any more to refine that question or anything?
Kind of what you just said steered it a little off to the side, maybe, where like it's about the awareness. I'm curious if you could say how the student teacher relationship is an awareness practice and not one of obeying or having a right and wrong bowing.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think it would be much easier if we could just say yes to everything the teacher says, agree with everything he, she, or they wants us to do, perform everything and receive approval. That's pretty lazy though. So if there's something that we see differently than the teacher, I think we have to be a little bit brave or courageous. And that's a kind of generosity as well, to question something. And I highly recommend bringing it straight to the teacher first. If possible. Every time I've done that, I've been surprised at the interaction with Sokuzan. And here's a point. I think a lot of people have missed this, where you can bring something really intense to the teacher, something you see in a certain way that is wrong about their behavior or the Sangha or the teachings, something you would like changed. And he, she, or they may listen to you completely, receive it completely. And then I guess I've seen students kind of baffled why nothing changed after that. So you can bring something, but that doesn't mean anything is going to change. It could be as simple as this form. I don't think this form is right. I think we should change this form to something else. And the teacher could say, okay, I'll consider that. And then nothing ever changes. And in certain situations, that can lead to someone feeling and then reporting to everyone that they're not being heard or listened to. We've talked about this before. And then a demand starts arising out of that. And so a teacher or anyone listening to you intently, receiving, doesn't mean they agree, doesn't mean anything will change, but you still have the opportunity to be heard. And that in itself is powerful. For me, I brought up some issues with Sokuzan. They were simple form things. And he said he would look into it, and nothing ever changed. And I love that in a way, because I'm forced to continue to do this form in a way that is irritating for me, because it was a form from another Sangha that is similar, and I just get to keep looking at that, like, why are we doing it this other way, and why aren't we changing it? And he heard, I know I feel like he heard me, felt like he completely heard me, and he considered it and didn't change it. Like, what a great teaching that is. And that you can do that for other people too. Like, I feel like that's a teaching of how we can be for each other as Sangha. Totally listen, totally receive, and you don't have to change anything. Like, there's some kind of liberation in there.
It's like your mudra for that.
Oh, Jishin.
Bowing. After everything which you said about being a true student, could you please say what makes somebody a true student? Bowing.
So this is kind of conceptual, trying to describe that. It's basically, I guess a simple way to say it is receiving everything as a teaching, not necessarily that you agree, disagree, or ignore it. But, and I'm borrowing this, a paraphrase from Sokuzan, but it seems so true to give everything your attention. That kind of generosity seems like the area of true student. And I'm trying to think of like what the opposite of that would be, but it's not really coming to me. But just all the distractions and cover-ups and speed, the spinning that we do, going really fast so we can get from here to there and not look at anything on the way, that kind of energy. And that could still be seen, I think, and be part of a true student's path. Any more in that area?
Bowing. We were talking a little bit today at noon about triggers and covers, and I'm wondering what makes a true student. What is the willingness in true student to look into that darkness which is coming with the triggers without covering them? Bowing.
So I'm hearing the question as what is the willingness that a true student has to go into the darkness? Something along those lines?
Yeah, being willing to look into the darkness instead of covering. Bowing.
So part of that might be watching yourself avoid the darkness and cover it up. Looking at a cover-up is looking at it, whatever it is, rising. I have questions about going into the darkness that I've asked Sokuzan as well, and I can't say that I'm clear on that. So, but from my own experience, I would say when I hear go into the darkness, I think I need to go find some darkness and go into it. So I'm a little too literal. The way it shows up for me is life has plenty of darkness and it's going to show up eventually. So we use the term training the mind, train your mind. So all the sitting we're doing, being with everything that arises, eventually something really dark, something really beyond what we expected will be around in such a way that we may not have a choice but to be with it. So there's that level, but there's also where you might see a little way out of that. You might see a way to delay that darkness, or just, just do something else. And you may have to do that as like taking care of yourself, as Shoto was bringing up. Maybe it's not time. Maybe you're not ready. How do you know if you're ready? There's no reference point. However, if you've been practicing a lot and you have a teacher and you can be with the darkness, you can go into it. To me, it's kind of like dropping everything. That's kind of how I go into something really dark. It's almost seeing that I have a way out and not leaving it, or watching myself leave it. That's one of the other ways. But to the other part of your question, the willingness, that seems to be a kind of, there's a traditional word, renunciation. I believe Trungpa Rinpoche preferred the word revulsion, and I tend to lean toward that as well, where living in samsara, doing all the things we do as samsaric beings, trying to get more good and less bad and ignore as much as possible, there can be a kind of feeling of getting a little fed up with that, kind of sick of it, seeing it in such a way that you start questioning, you get curious. So that I feel like that word willingness comes out of kind of a revulsion of samsara. Just like, kind of, what's the point of all this? Yeah, is there any more in that area?
Jishin Bowing, thank you. I'm wondering, I didn't mean if I said, so I apologize if I said that about stepping into the darkness. It seems to me that the darkness is kind of stepping into me, and I see it as unknown, which this is the question of willingness of being with the unknown, instead of covering and escaping or whatever, finding the way of not being with it. So is the true student someone who and what would be the verb here? Who is open to live with the unknown, coming from life, coming from the teacher. Bowing.
Short answer, yes. I think as you were asking that, what came up was there isn't anyone. So the true student is looking at that as well. So the unknown is actually a reflection of, you don't even know who this is. We don't even know what a student is. You start looking at things that directly, that closely, where you start to see that you have an assumption you know what a student is, but if you say that word over and over and over and you keep contemplating it, you don't know what a student is. which you can kind of do with anything.
Thank you.
James,
So do you think having starting off on kind of an impure basis for things is the duty of the teacher to correct bowing?
I think it could feel that way or be perceived that way. However, some other language is coming around that where the teacher is there to, with your permission, point out things you are not aware of. And that could feel like correcting. However, it's more like there's all this stuff and there's certain things you can't see in your own identity or lack thereof. And if you have a strong connection to a teacher, they may be able to point those out. And they're, even though it can feel like criticism, it can feel like correcting, there's also a relief sometimes, or even a quality of having known it was always there. Yeah, it can tickle a little bit even. Yes.
All right. And James bowing. So in a sense, you could say concentration is a product of just letting things be as they are. And people that lack concentration skills, sometimes, do you think they have to kind of start on that before they can start on what they want to do, like change things? Because people keep asking Sokuzan to change things, but it feels like they aren't, they're forgetting to do that. Down.
So the question I heard is, do we need to have some kind of concentration first before we're able to work with things? Is that kind of the area you're going in?
It's kind of the idea of if you have a spinning mind happening, you need to stop the spinning before you start walking forward.
I don't think so. I think if you've done some block sits or other long periods of sitting, there's a lot of time spent being with a spinning mind, especially when you, for me, when I first sit down often, not always. And it can be halfway through as well, where something gets triggered and now I'm watching a huge drama for the next hour. But the ability to sit there and, like, we're lucky to have this human body that can just sit here somewhat still and watch that spinning and see how it works. Have a little bit of curiosity around all the qualities of that spinning. And there's something in there where it's not believed in quite as much, therefore not not as much agency for the spinning, let's say. That's a hard area to talk about. But training our minds to witness things like that without buying into it or becoming a character in that drama, even though that may happen as well and you're aware of that. So that's how it's like, it really comes back to awareness, so that whatever arises, awareness is there as the primary thing that isn't a thing. Okay, one more, then we gotta close.
Do you ever think of the fact that whether you want to or not, you are part of that drama? There's no such thing as an invisible person in it, Alan?
Yes, that sounds to me like I'm not separate from any drama. And that's another reason I try to practice as much as I can, because you can run into any situation at any time, anywhere, that is extremely seductive or aggressive or completely ignorant. And if you've trained on this path as we are here, perhaps we could be less of a nuisance, and if we're really, really lucky, maybe even benefit.
But how can there be a less or a more if there's no scale?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's just a way of talking about it. I agree. Did you have one more, Shoto?
No, I was appreciating you calling out the time.
Okay,
I'm
we're gonna-
playing Sukansu.
Dedicate the mirror.